Hi, it's Nell, and today I'm going to be talking about planting Bougainvillea. In particular, there's one very important thing that you need to know when planting this oh so colorful and floriferous plant. So stick around and find out what it is. I am now back home with my Bougainvillea barberkarst behind me, which is just sort of in between blooms. It's going to be putting out a big show again soon. But I've done quite a few videos and blogs about Bougainvillea care and Bougainvillea pruning, but I've never done one on the planting. So that's why I wanted to do this one. And now I'm not actually going to plant a Bougainvillea for you. I'm going to tell you what you need to do because I have 4 of them and I really don't want any more. That's enough. I don't have a huge garden, so 4 is plenty, but I have planted quite a few of them. Now, the first thing you need to know is that Bougainvillea needs to go in a spot with at least 6 hours of full sun a day. It loves sun and it loves heat. Here in the desert, in Tucson and Phoenix, it does really well, even against a hot wall. So you want to give it lots and lots of sun if you want that big bloom, which we all do. Now, planting Bougainvillea in the garden is the same as planting a shrub, and I did a video and a blog post about how to plant shrubs successfully in the garden, so you can watch that. I will leave the link to it down below. But I'll just tell you that you need to dig the hole about two times plus as wide as the root ball, because you want to give it plenty of easy room for those new roots to like spread and grow until they get bigger and established and really tough. And I also break up the soil in the bottom of the hole too to really aerate it, because what is really important for Bougainvillea is they need excellent drainage. Because if they don't have good drainage, they are subject to root rot, so they can rot out. So you want to make sure that your soil drains really well, that the water goes through it. A good rule is if you fill up the hole and the water hasn't drained out in an hour, you probably have a problem. And when I'm planting Bougainvillea in the garden, I always add a generous amount of compost, because compost is going to really loosen the soil and enrich it too. So I usually do like 1/3 compost to 2/3 of the native soil when I'm planting. You just mix it as you go along and make sure it's in there, because the ideal soil for Bougainvillea is a nice loamy soil. And you probably have an idea of how your soil is, what it's composed of, so you can amend how you see fit and how to really aid the drainage and make it as optimum as can be. Because in the last post I did, if Bougainvillea stays too wet, if it's constantly too wet, if you're overwatering it, you're going to get much more green growth than you are flower growth, and you can have a lot of the leaves falling off, and then ultimately the plant will succumb to the overwatering. So you want to make sure that it has that really good drainage. And what else was I going to say on that? Oh yes, it's better to do like infrequent deep waterings rather than frequent shallow waterings. But when your Bougainvillea is establishing, it is good to give it more regular water, because it needs that to get going. And in containers, if you're planting Bougainvillea in containers, I'll just say that the shorter varieties are more suited to containers. The ones that get really tall, the ones that get 25 to 30 feet, are a little tougher in containers over time, because you need such a huge container so the roots can grow. But what is just fine to plant it in is something like a good organic potting soil, because again, it's going to drain through easily. And then you would add like maybe one part compost to 4 parts potting soil. You wouldn't use quite as much compost with the potting soil because there's probably already compost in it. but you want to mix in some compost as you go along, and you can also put some on the top too to really enrich it and make sure it drains through. To make sure the water drains through. Okay, so coming up is the thing that's really important, so pay attention now. I learned this when I first moved to California. I was living on the East Coast, and I grew up on a farm. I studied horticulture and landscape architecture. I was an experienced gardener by then, but I didn't know plants in California, and there are so many plants in California. So I went to work at a really good nursery, and I learned so much there. And one of the first things I learned was from the grower who supplied the Bougainvillea. Said, do not take the Bougainvillea out of the container when you plant it. So that's the thing that you need to know is you leave Bougainvillea in its container. Now, it could survive. It could be a crapshoot. But if you want to really ensure that it is going to do well, leave it in its container. And I'm going to show you what you need to do. Because Bougainvillea is really, really tough. It has those thorns, and it can take the sun and the heat, but it's a big baby when it comes to having its roots disturbed. So you don't want to do that at all. So what I would usually do is I would just take my pruners and I would make slits in the pot here and there. Now, of course, you have to be careful when the root ball is in because you don't want to just be jabbing, but you can go down in different places and just slit the grow pot this way, and it just enables the roots to be able to grow out of the pot. Or you can take a knife and just do it that way, being careful again, so that opens it up so those roots can grow out. And if you're careful, you could also use a saw here and there. And then I'll usually do a few cuts on the bottom too, just to make sure that the roots are able to grow out of the bottom of the pot. So that is what you do. And if you want to cut the rim off, that's up to you, because oftentimes the root ball is sunk down in the pot, so it's not going to hurt it. You just want to make sure that when you plant, the top of the root ball is even with the top of the soil level, so you don't want it way, way down in the hole. So oftentimes the rim will be sticking up. And for me, I always cut the rim off just because I didn't think it was that attractive. But if it doesn't bother you, you can leave it on. I mean, it's not going to hurt the plant. But so, then you can just go all around and cut the rim off the pot too. So that is what you do to enable the Bougainvillea to grow. You want to at least put 4 or 5 slits in the side, and you want to put a few on the bottom too, so that way they can spread and do their thing. So spring and summer are great times to plant a Bougainvillea because it's nice and warm. They can take the heat. That's okay. And it gives them quite a few months to settle in before the winter hits, because if there's a cold spell, say there's an unusual cold spell and you have a newly planted Bougainvillea, it could get hit by the frost, especially if you've planted it in like October or November. So it's best to try to get it in early so it can adjust and be all settled in by the time the cooler weather comes. Now, transplanting a Bougainvillea, I can't tell you anything about because I've never tried to transplant one before, because I know this about don't disturbing the roots. So transplanting again could be a crapshoot. So I don't know. I don't recommend transplanting a Bougainvillea at all. It might be worth it just to plant a new one if you need to transplant it for some reason. But plant your Bougainvillea where you think it's going to stay and where it's going to be growing. That way you don't have to worry about disturbing the roots. So as always, there will be a blog post to go along with this video. The link will be down below, along with some other links to the videos that I've done on Bougainvillea. But I just want to do a quick recap. You want to make sure that it's in enough sun and heat because bougainvilleas love that. You want to make sure that the soil is well demanded because it needs to drain well. If it's in a container, you want to make sure the size is appropriate for the size of the container, and you want to use a good potting soil so that the water just washes through because they are subject to root rot. And you also want to make sure that you leave the plant in the container, planted right in the grow pot, and you can do what I did to it. You can slit it however is easiest for you. In transplanting, not such a good idea. You can try it, but I wouldn't recommend it. So, I hope you have found this video to be helpful. And if I have forgotten to say anything, which I don't think I have, it'll be in the blog post. But I thank you for all your likes and your subscribes. I really appreciate them. I have a lot more gardening videos coming your way. And speaking of garden and gardening, let's get out in the garden and make the world a more beautiful place. As always, I thank you so much for watching. And if you plant bougainvillea, I hope it's a color explosion. Bye.